Good morning. If you're joining us very early online, my name is Lorraine Van Kerkhoff. I'm the Director of the Institute for Water Futures at the ANU, and I'm very pleased to be bringing together this stellar team that I'll introduce briefly in a moment for our session on imagination and asking the question, is imagination a limiting factor when we're thinking about reimagining Earth system governance? We're kind of, I guess, intrigued and generated some curiosity with the title of this forum session. So we thought, well, let's play with that a bit more and think about what it might mean to be more imaginative and certainly more speculative in our approaches to futuring and how that might apply, how that might help us in the context of Earth system governance. So our program for today, we're going to, each of the speakers, there's myself, Katrina and Claudia in the room, and we have Sky and Stephanie online. We're each going to give about a 5-minute flash talk, giving a perspective on speculation and speculative futuring and what its role might be, and some of our experiences in working with these kinds of methods and methodologies. We will be then handing over to Stephanie, and we're going to be getting speculative. We are going to do an interactive session where Stephanie's going to lead you through an activity that will put all of you, all of us, into a speculative scenario so that we can have an experience. Just a taster. It's a very condensed version of a process that would normally take quite a lot longer, but just a taster of what a speculative futures process might look like and feel like, and again, what we might gain from this kind of process and interaction. Claudia will then lead us through a reflection, short fishbowl type exercise, which is why we pulled the tables aside, and we'll rearrange the chairs a little and hopefully be able to engage everybody online as well. And then we'll wrap up with a couple of minutes of applications on speculative processes and how they might help us to enable change and create those kinds of perhaps safe spaces, the scaffolded spaces that we spoke about a moment ago, in engaging with some of these really complex, difficult issues in a context that perhaps is a little bit removed from the urgency of the here and now, with the potential to open up new ways of thinking, new ways of engaging with each other and understanding the issues in front of us. So very briefly, I'm not going to give, I'll invite each of the speakers to introduce themselves as we go through. I'm going to open, as I said, Lorraine Van Kerkhoff, Director of the Institute for Water Futures at the ANU. IWF is a cross-campus initiative at the university, and we try to bring together lots of different perspectives on water management, but particularly with a view to thinking about longer-term futures and essentially, how can we help to reorientate water management from being very much about what's here and now, what are the challenges we're confronting today, what are the challenges that might be in the next 3, 4, 5 years, to really trying to think about engaging decision makers, policy makers with the long-term future of water in Australia and internationally. I'm going to hand over then to Katrina, and Katrina's going to be talking us through some of the work that she's been doing with gaming from CSIRO, then to Claudia, who's going to help us understand some of these different approaches to futures and futuring, also from the work that they've been doing in CSIRO. We have Sky Doherty online, who's going to give us a journalistic perspective on how we might start to engage with the more creative approaches to understanding the future through a journalistic lens, which you will also be using in your interactive exercise. And Stephanie's going to be leading us through her really innovative applications for how we go about futuring in speculative, creative, imaginative ways. So with that, I'm going to just set the scene a little bit, thinking about the future well. And one of the things that I think can perhaps put forward here is that, it's actually really hard to think about the future well, to think about it creatively. And what we have here is a couple of observations that have been, go backwards, that we see quite commonly when we talk to people about the future, and you may be familiar with this and have some other takes on it as well, that just trying to get rid of this bar on my screen. I don't see it, that's all right. A really common approach is when you ask people to think about the long-term future is that they will say that the future is like the present, only better, right? We want it to be the same. We would like continuity. We want it to be much as the same as it is, but just with some of the problems fixed. So like today, only better. It's actually really hard for people to think about the future as being different and particularly radically different. The other one that some neuroscientists have explored is the notion of when they asked people, when they looked into from a neurological point of view, why people find it difficult to think and plan for the long-term future at a very personal level, that they've come up with the understanding that when people are asked to think about the future, they've done fMRI scans on them when they're doing this. The parts of the brain that light up are the parts of the brain that light up when you are confronting a stranger or thinking about a stranger. So they've come to the conclusion that when we think about ourselves in the long-term future, it's like we're thinking about a stranger that we don't know, and actually we don't really like the look of very much. So we don't like to engage with the future in that way. That was largely in the context of asking questions like, why don't people save more in their superannuation, right? Because we don't actually like that person in the future. We don't know what they're like, and we don't want to go there. So there are a couple of reasons why thinking about the future is really hard. But of course, we do it all the time. And from a scientific perspective, we're very good at thinking and talking about futures in a predictive way. And this is our predictive modelling, this is our forecasting, this is our climate projections. You know, all of these things very much approach the future, and particularly the long-term future, from a predictive point of view. And this conceptualisation that I'm sharing with you now is a very simple one, and there are lots of other takes on this. But this is really where what we're trying to do when we think about the future is identify what's the most likely, the single most likely future that we're going to need to prepare for or cope with or adapt to. We also can then say, well, there's another dimension to this, which is more anticipatory. And this is more where we see adaptation, risk management, multiple scenarios, and saying, okay, well, there might be one most likely future, but actually that's not certain. So we need to accommodate a range of futures and identify what those parameters are by which we think about a range of futures. So again, you know, something that's probably quite familiar to you. Speculative futures are the other side of that triangle. And I guess the one that I feel we're the least comfortable with, the least familiar with. And these are fictional, they're imaginary, but they're really necessary for change. And in the context of the themes about transformation, you know, I'd argue that we really have to engage with the speculative and the imaginary, because if we don't go there, we're not actually changing. We're staying in that box of the future's going to be like this today, only better. So it's really opening up that space for thinking about the future differently. So speculative is really about what could or should be. Predictive is really trying to figure out what will be. And anticipatory is what's the range of what's likely to be. Now, we might think about trying to achieve some balance then between them. We tend to be pretty heavily skewed, particularly in the sciences and the water space that I come from, towards the predictive. You know, let's get the models better. Let's try and figure out how we can reduce or manage uncertainty. How can we quantify it? How can we just do those sorts of things? But if we think about trying to achieve some kind of balance between these three, then maybe that's a more productive way to go. Or perhaps we might think about how do we circulate through these different kinds of modes of thinking about the future so that we can gain the benefits from different ones at different points in time in a decision-making process, let's say. Is there a time where it's better to be speculative? Is there a time where it's better to be more predictive or more anticipatory? You know, how might we think about the flow between these different understandings of the future to come up with better outcomes and solutions? So what we're going to do today is explore probably the territory within this triangle that's the least familiar to most of us. Not all of us, thankfully, and some of you might well be in this space. But we wanted to kind of open up this part of the triangle that's really about the speculative, imaginary and creative dimensions. So with that, you know, what we're aiming for here, or what I hope you'll take away from this session, is obviously to recognise these three sides of the triangle, these three interactive ways of thinking about the future. Think about strengths and weaknesses and ideas of balance or circulation or flow through the different states, and do they make sense? And you know, talk to us about how we might ask interesting questions about these long-term futures and these different ways of engaging with the future. So we'll give you some more tasters of that and some experiences of that as we go through. With that, I will hand over to Katrina.
Hi everyone, my name's Katrina. I'm a postdoc at CSIRO and I'm a science fiction nut. And having just had that introduction from Lorraine, you might understand why that's relevant in this context. But it's actually almost a personal story for how I ended up here, because I read this book probably about 10 years ago now, I think, which is a speculative futures book. I think it was written like around the late 2000s, and it's set in the near future, and it's basically about people who go out and try to do things to solve climate change. And I was like, oh, that's the thing that you can do. And so, you know, through lots of, I guess, like quite a lot of different winding pathways, that's how I've ended up where I am now. What do I do? At the moment, I'm a landscape modeler, but I do all sorts of, I guess, like modelling of futures. So I talk to people to find out like what sort of futures they want to see, this idea of imaginary and speculative futures, but again, engaging with this concept that there are these three different sides of the triangle. We work out what goals people want to achieve. So like I've got to put this into a quantitative, I guess, framework. So like we need to actually model things for that. Kind of work out how climate change might affect that. And then I go away and I do things in computers. And then I build stories of what those futures might look like. And with the, you know, the previous session we had on co-production, there's that idea of I've gotten all that, you know, we've gone through a co-production process to get to this point, and then, you know, got to report back. And I report back most frequently these days in the form of stories. But I read this paper a couple of years ago now, and it was one of those papers that sort of blew my mind, because it's this very long review of why we've failed to do anything about global emissions and climate change. And there's this whole section on it's because we don't imagine the future very well. And not only do we not imagine the future very well, we're being guided to not imagine the future very well. And yeah, that had a very profound influence on my thinking. But at the same time, there's also this idea that we need to imagine the future, including, you know, different governance, different planning, different everything, in order to get to transformation, to get to a sustainable future. So I think that's why it's just an introduction for why I think this is important. And how are some of the ways that we do imagine the future at the moment? So there's a lot of this science fiction, solar punk, speculative futures. A lot of this can be quite depressing. The Deluge is maybe the most depressing book I've ever read. But I was also fascinated by it, and I can't stop thinking about it. So it stimulates the imagination. But there are other ways that we can imagine the future as well. I'll just wait for... we can do it through artwork and through poetry. Just thinking back to 2 sessions ago, I don't know if everyone was here, but there was someone that was talking about having artwork as part of their futures work. This is something that's close to my heart. I do my own, I'm a crafter, so like this idea of temperature blankets, where people will do one row of a blanket, which is the temperature of the day, and that kind of like gives you, like, it's sort of like recording the present, but I think there's also an element of hope in that we can change what the future might look like. And as Lorraine suggested or mentioned earlier, in my own work I use games. So it's actually the same game but in 2 different contexts. So we have like a big table, and that table has like a cloth on it which represents the landscape. As I said, I do landscape modelling. But in that landscape, we we do things like herding sheep, or in the West Australian context, it was herding cattle. And then we have, it's set in a small town. So this table is a small town, and there's like a sub game where you have to collect all your shopping at shops in the town, or else the shops might shut down. And it's basically, we step through several different time steps throughout the game, starting from the past. So we don't even start in the future, we start in the past, and then we go 100 years into the future. And we use it not in itself as a way to imagine the future, but as a way to get people to think differently about how the future could turn out. And yeah, we've definitely had some, I think the game is less, like the game is, as we were talking in the previous session, it's a boundary object to get people to think differently. And then it's the discussion that happens afterwards, which is where it gets people to, I guess, stimulate people to think differently. But there are other sorts of games that people use. So I was at a conference earlier this year where we were shown a tabletop game, like not this sort of tabletop game, but the like just board game type thing where it represents the system, like it's an urban system, and everyone gets to play like a different person that controls one of the parts of that system. So like the water or the sewerage or whatever. And there are also computer games, and this particular one, there we go. This particular one really caught my attention. It's not released yet, it's a computer game, but basically there's you're a climate lawyer, and you have to represent a river, which again, as harking back to earlier sessions, which has been given personhood. But has now been degraded. And it's a very inventive way, I guess, to get people to think differently and to engage with these issues. But just to end on my own, I guess, personal opinion is I actually think that humans are great at imagining things. And like when we think about, people love to watch science fiction, love to read science fiction. Some people do, actually. I have encountered people who think it's the worst thing in the world. So, but I think people are great at imagining the future, and I think what we need to work on is get people to do that imagining and then work out how to connect from the present to then.
Thank you. Right, so we're going to move on now to Claudia.
Thank you, Lorraine. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to be talking, sorry. A little bit of what I have been doing in CSIRO in the last couple of years. I work with Katrina, two of my other colleagues here in the room, in the Value and Sustainability Future Science platform. I have been in the last years talking a lot with people, with scientists that work in a science policy interface about how they use the future, how they imagine the future, how they communicate the future, how they engage with the future. In the context of the work and understanding the capabilities people have to do this hard thinking about a different future, not beyond this normal way of doing science. So I want to bring you your attention that when we talk about imagination, we have imagination as these individuals, each of us as individuals, cognitive processes to create ideas, to think about different things. But we also have these imaginaries that are representations about the future based on collective interpretations of the world. These imagination and imaginaries are both of them are based on values, on the things we value, the things that we want to bring out, the things we like, we want to bring those things into the future. So these things also bring a lot of emotions, good emotions, bad reactions, or good reactions to how we engage with the speculative futures. So this, if we pay attention to these values and those emotions, but it could be a very powerful way of engaging in speculative futures, and can also a way that we need to pay attention to that in the way that it can be mobilizing or being a barrier to hinder the way we engage in in different futures thinking. And in the science policy interface, I think it's what we want to bring with this session is about how we can mobilize imagination, not beyond this traditional way of doing science, but it's a way that creates a legitimate and relevant contribution to the way we engage with our stakeholders. This can also bring into our attention the concept of time that we have been talking before. But basically, I talk about that as the temporal frames we use to communicate the way we use this time in design processes and think about outcomes and envision the outcomes of our science. So here in the left, we have the traditional technical, scientific, theoretical approaches to observe our world, to measure, to understand our reality, to understand social and ecological systems, which we are using them mostly for planning and decision making. This is very, very well known, models, etc., for predicting the future and the near future. To the right, we have all the inter and transdisciplinary capabilities for implementing those things we have in the left, which include foresighting and visioning is part of those capabilities. But what happens when we bring speculative futures? Speculative futures that bring things that are completely different from the things we are doing, and even creative art or things that are radically different for the things we can imagine in the future. So I have been talking with people from researchers in CSIRO and some of the external stakeholders also. And I'm realizing that, yes, we can have multiple futures, that our capacity to engage in these multiple futures, we need to pay attention to what's happening now. So what are we doing now? But also, this is also going to be framed by these multiple paths with the multiple grievances, injustices, achievements. There are many things that have happened in the past that is hard to bring. So in interviews and conferences and workshops that we have been doing, I have been capturing some of these insights, just a little snapshot of what people have been saying. So when we think about a speculative future, really, people think that this is really good in a way of making consequential about the world, that really helps them thinking about differently about the consequences of the work we're doing. But also, and people are saying this is a capability we need, a capacity we need to bring. Many of us don't have this skill set. We need to pay more attention on how we create this. We create this. We need to become experts on this. At the same time, I have been talking with people that says, and it's a little bit of different what Katrina said, not everybody has the capacity to think about the future in that way. Some people think of themselves as a more practical person, that want to pay more attention to these grievances and injustices and the things that are happening in the present before they can engage in that very speculative future. But there is also this question about how we overcome this issue that all the people in the room have different views of what a perfect future is. So this is part of the thing we have been talking before about pluralism, about what future or futures are we bringing? This projectification. People responding that, yes, we are engaged in imagining the future outcome of the project. People just realize that our projects we have very time allocated to a project, so it's hard for them to understand how are they going to communicate the outcomes to the project. They have very limited time to really create a meaningful connections and trust with their stakeholders to actually deliver this project. So this is some of the legal snapshots that people have been saying. So just to recap, imagination is this higher order mental processes that is powerful. It enables intersubjectivity, is socially constructive, and it refers to what is unreal, unknowable, or yet to come, but we need to pay attention on how we engage with that and create the capacities, because the way we are doing that is not there yet. So some of the questions I'm going to bring for thinking about this is to think about, reflect what are the political culture that we're using in this knowledge and decision making, and to how much room for imagination are in the current processes for that. So that's basically what I'm thinking today. So I think I took more time than needed.
Thanks, Claudia. So across now to Sky, who's online joining us from UQ. Thanks, Sky.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Lorraine. Thank you for everyone for having me. I'm a design researcher at the University of Queensland in Brisbane. I'm primarily based in the School of Communication and Arts. I had a previous career as a journalist, and the project I'll talk to you about today draws on that practice quite heavily. But at UQ, I'm also part of a group called the What If Lab, and we are a mixture of, well, there's me who's from design background, but also creative writers, and we often use speculation and creative practices and run workshops on on real world issues. But what I'm going to talk to you today is a bit of an experimental magazine project that I've been, or zine project that I've been working on over the last 12 months that uses practices from journalism and design to envision alternative social futures. So Wicked Thinking is the name, and I publish news from the future. I aim to take kind of complex social issues, and the two that I'll talk about today is the futures of forced migration and bushfire, and kind of imagine how things could change and the consequences of some of those changes that could happen. I call this kind of envisioning speculative news, and I see them as stories that aim to provoke thinking about how society might respond to some of the wicked problems that we're facing in a way that accounts for people, power, politics, and systems that we have. So speculative news stories are basically design fictions that leverage a journalistic aesthetic. So design fictions, they originated in technology design, but they've got quite a broad definition and application now. But they're stories, prototypes, provocations that explain of situations in which imagined products or technologies exist and how they might actually be used. So the design fictions that I've written essentially are basically future dated news stories that report on future fictional events. They're informed by primary sources, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but they respond to that material, but instead of reporting on it in a journalistic sense, they project it into the future and think about how things might change. As in real news, leveraging that aesthetic, I use direct quotes to provide authority and drama and expression. However, in this kind of form, the quotations are often fictionalized and the sources are unnamed. Sometimes the quotes are direct though, but the person who said it, you don't know who that is. But this helps focus the stories on the systems and the impact of that on society, rather than to valorize or victimize victims or emphasize single experiences. That's why I don't use people's names generally. Next slide, Lorraine. News is a really helpful aesthetic, I think, to talk about futures because it provides a recognizable interface to understand the world. It's also a very handy way of leveraging connotations of balance, truth, and public service. I know there's all these problems with the media, but still we do have these underlying connotations that come with news. So while speculative news draws on some of these conventions, the stories themselves don't function in the same way. You'll be familiar that regular news seeks to answer questions, and it's grounded in the immediate past or very near future, and tries to explain what is, rather than imagine what might be. And so the speculative news stories aim to reflect the real issues that they are kind of reflecting, and also the tensions involved, but also explore how those might play out. I don't really see speculative news as fact or fiction. I think it's kind of a meld, and it's somewhere in the middle ground where imagination is melding with reality. Next slide, Lorraine. So obviously this type of practice isn't typically associated with journalism, obviously. So so it is a bit kind of radical that way. But in terms of wicked thinking, I published 2 issues of the zine so far, one on the futures of forced migration and one on the futures of bushfire. They're little booklets like this. This one's about 32 pages, I think. And I also published some news online. So both of the projects I'll talk about in a minute, this is the futures of forced migration. You're seeing that story list there, but they're both informed by UQ research projects. And so the stories draw on interviews, observations, literature surveys, and in each of these projects, we ran a futures workshop as well. And so the stories grapple with that. So Futures of Forced Migration was a project that we ran with the UNHCR, part of them, and to kind of think about how might the UNHCR grapple with the prospect of about 1 billion people being displaced globally by 2050, for example. That kind of large-scale migration obviously is going to be a massive challenge for governments, humanitarian agencies, and then the question that they're interested in is how can they leverage technologies and how might technologies be used to help manage that. And obviously that brings up a load of questions about surveillance, artificial intelligence, identity, and all these kinds of things. So the stories in this issue explore how issues of freedom, efficiency, trust, security might play out over a 20-year timeframe. And so this issue includes 6 stories between 2028 and 2043. And they tell of things like a public backlash against Western governments using AI, to middle-income disaster victims in Western liberal democracies. They talk of nomadic domestic populations demanding the same rights as conflict refugees, for whom in this future, a digital identity system is working very well, actually, and the internal displaced people would like a bit of that. There's also stories about like a consent-based AI-powered refugee management system and the emergence of disaster-resilient enclaves for the super rich. So they cover a range of kind of potential scenarios. The next one, which is the futures of bushfire, that tackles the issue of kind of we're all living in a more fire-prone climate, hotter and drier conditions, bigger fire seasons, and all the things that go along with that. Obviously, responding to bushfires is expensive. The UN would like more money devoted to prevention and preparedness. Governments and individuals want communities to share the risks. And insurers want people to live in less risky places. But of course, these are complicated things. So there's 7 stories in this issue that span 2029 to 2095. And again, they imagine how systems might work in new ways. For instance, communities and governments working collaboratively, the factors needed to force greater attention on environmental health, alternative measures of success for disaster response and radical insurance products, and alternative social contracts. So they're a really nice way of kind of exploring what could be possible and plausible in some cases. Some of these futures are utopian, some of them are dystopian, some of them are really mundane. Obviously, I'm not trying to predict the future, but provoke people to think about and envision how to construct a better one. So I think it just helps us think about questions like how could things play out, and is this desirable? What is the future we might want, and is this the future we want? And if so, let's act. If not, what different choices would we need to make? And I just see this project as a provocation to help shape the future that we might desire. Thank you.
Thank you, Skye. Now we're going to move on to our last flash talk by Stephanie, which is going to seamlessly segue into the activity that we're going to be doing. So I'll hand over to Stephanie, and you'll see some echoes of Skye's presentation and where we're going next as well. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you, Lorraine, and thanks for having me. Yes, what I want to talk about is very similar and building on what the other speakers have spoken about. And I want to connect it into sort of our role as researchers and decision makers and people trying to influence decision-making process. And why is that role of imagination important for all of us? And so I've got a few points here and a couple of quotes that that lean into two sort of different kind of areas. One is about actually, which we've spoken about already, is expanding the options, expanding our imagination to be able to open new pathways and see something different, and why that's so important. But also on a very practical sense, the idea of actually using imagination as a way to handle uncertainty and shock and change and things like that, of which we all recognise as something that we're going to have to face pretty soon, if we're not already. Next slide, please, Lorraine. So I've been doing some research. I'm a PhD student at the Institute of Water Futures, and I've been looking into how we can build these imaginative capacities and how we can grow particularly our futures thinking skills, of which I think this imagining or reimagining is really important. And this model here is something that I've proposed as a way to think about, and Lorraine mentioned this at the start, about where imagination fits into this space. So there's a need for us to actually engage in this ongoing, I should say, learning cycle. And if we think about that a bit in terms of it being a reflexive process, something that we need to keep cycling through. So we constantly need to reassess and notice what's sticking out for us. And moving into some playing and questioning, and that might involve some imagination and speculative activity as well, and also doing some reimagining, and then that we can apply this actually into the decision-making process. And I think thinking about what the other speakers have said, one thing that I would sort of suggest as a key point from this is that if we don't do the reimagining, if we don't imagine different and we don't work with the communities that are affected by our research or our decisions to imagine different, then other people are going to do the imagining for us. And that's going to be largely the wealthy, the powerful, that sort of thing, and that can lead to injustice and so on. Next slide, thanks. The next slide coming. Well, while that's going up, there we go. Thank you. And I'll just touch on this very briefly because the other speakers have already spoken about this, but growing that imaginative capacity in ourselves does involve engaging with these other forms of sort of knowledge and understanding and I guess, invigoration for our thinking through different means. And I've got a few pictures there of artworks and installations and museum exhibits, and one in the top right of a workshop that I've done around these sort of engaging with these more playful, more open-ended sort of ideas. And just as Skye mentioned at the end there, a big part of it, I think, is the role of this as a provocation and disruption, and something that can sort of shake us out of where we are. So on that, the next slide is to actually have a think about having a go at something of this. And I'll warn the people online that I'm going to call for volunteers soon. So please, if you can have a think about if you can be involved in this, that would be really great. So what we're going to do is actually have a go at a bit of a speculative role play. And I was in the session earlier with Asan talking about his Pathways Theatre idea, and it's a similar sort of concept, although it's not bringing people in to change sort of the vision of the future. What it's doing is providing this alternative idea, in some ways a deliberately provocative and deliberately unlikely idea, and getting people to inhabit that and experience it, to disrupt their patterns of thinking, to imagine something quite different. So we're going to, which also builds on the idea of a river with personhood, and we're going to imagine that the Living River Act of 2039 has come into play, and we are going to role play a meeting of this Council of the Living River. So where the council members are made up of, there's the list on the right there. The people in the room are going to receive a copy of the Act, which is obviously fictionalized. It's not real. but you might enjoy reading it and seeing it as a piece of something to immerse you in that future, to really try and imagine it as real, a bit in a similar way as the journalistic sort of approach takes as well. And then the people online, we are going to attempt to run a little bit of the role play ourselves. So I'm not sure if I can, oh, actually, I might just jump to the last slide so I can explain. Oh, not last, that one. Yep. The next. Yeah. So to do this, we will, sorry, no, go back one.
Okay.
So yeah, we do need to be a little bit uncomfortable perhaps for this, go into a place we're not comfortable with, be willing to play and have a go. We're going to try and keep it succinct, just mindful that we don't have a lot of time. As Lorraine said at the start, it's really just a taster. So the online participants will be the council members, and the on-site participants are going to be the press gallery, and Lorraine will help you with that in the room. And then we can go to the next slide. So this is our mock agenda for our meeting, and the people online, we're going to try and go into another platform, and we're hoping this works. It's a bit of a test running with the systems that we've got at the moment. So we're going to try and step into another space, which will then project onto the screen for the people in the room to imagine they're witnessing this meeting. We're not going to run the whole meeting. I'm sure enough of us have been to bureaucratic meetings not to need to do all of it. But we're going to jump to that agenda item that you can see highlighted there, item 1.1, which is a request for a variation, which we'll talk about in the meeting. But basically, the people in the online are going to take on the role. There is 11 council members, so I can have up to 11 volunteers. We won't be able to do the breakout rooms. We worked out we couldn't do that, but we'll have 11 volunteers or less if we can't get that many, but please come and join us to role play this and decide whether we're going to approve or deny this request. So on that, I'm not sure, Jonathan, are we able to, have we got the link?
Yeah, the link just shared it in the chat now.
Yep.
Great. So the people who are going to come and role play, as Jonathan said, they were going to need to leave the Zoom session and then come back to it afterwards. But we will be able to see each other over in the other meetings. So fingers crossed this all works. Good luck in the room.
While you're
Hope to
doing that,
see some of you over there. Yep.
while you're doing that, we will hand out the provisions for the people in the room for the press gallery and get them underway.
Do our chairs stay in the same position?
Yeah, you can stay in the same position. Yeah, for now, we will be moving them later. So, every member of the press gallery gets a little information pack. You have a pass, press gallery pass. And if you flip over your press gallery pass, you will see who you are writing for in your press gallery role. I haven't stapled these together because. Thank you. The task of the member of the press gallery is to pay attention to the item that's being discussed in a rightfully bureaucratic way. And write look at who you're writing for, decide on a deadline that you would use if you were reporting on something. So have a good look through the legislation.
I think it's getting started.
Right, okay.
But they're doing stuff separately, right?
Can we see what they're doing though?
I can put that up. I'll need to swap over screens.
Okay,
They can start independently.
yeah. Okay.
Yes, I'll just,
Right.
but if you want to, but you can get started.
Yep. Okay, so you've got your legislation and you've got your agenda. So have a look through both of those items. And as Stephanie mentioned, the one that we will be looking at, or that the group online will be looking at, is item 1.1, and that's explained in more detail at the bottom. So the challenge, of course, with item 1.1, we have different members of the council that you can see on the back of the legislation there. So the people online are each representing one of these groups. So there's a member for who's representing the interests of current and future reptiles and insects, arachnids, microbiota, and fungi. There's a member who is representing humans. There's a member representing current and future mammals and birds. Members. So each of the members of the council are representing some part of the ecosystem, social ecological system of the river. You'll notice that there's somewhere in there is a member for AI as well, that plays a significant part in this particular exercise. And then there is the member for the interests of all other things not represented by other members. So they need to be inclusive across these categories. So that's the personas that have been taken in the online group are these members, and they will be debating the topic that's here in front of us. As you'll see written in, as I said, delightfully bureaucratic language. The issue that they're going to be discussing has been tabled by the members for small terrestrial plants, aquatic and estuarine plants, fish and other aquatic species. So this is small terrestrial and fish aquatics. And they want more inflow through the proactive abatement of large terrestrial plants. So essentially they are making a request to cut down a bunch of trees. So that's kind of what it boils down to. Because the trees are sucking up too much water and the fish and the small plants are missing out. And there's been unplanned regeneration and all of these things. So it's a little bit reminiscent perhaps of some of the debates that we might see around today. So a 20% reduction in the number of large terrestrial plants to reduce their impact on other species. So that's the item that they are debating that you will be reporting on. So if you have a look at your press gallery card, your pass, you'll see on the back that you are representing an organisation. But there is an organisation on the other side. So think about that as the audience that you're reporting to. How might you frame this? How might you present this to your audience based on whatever it is that they come up with their deliberations and Does that make sense? Yep. Oh, there you go.
Yes, okay.
So
yeah,
that was a couple of minutes ago.
Yeah, sure. Sweet. Okay. Yes, just want to see.
Just making the headline now, or are you waiting to
You
hear
can, you can start to think about what
so
the different
Stephanie,
scenarios are and think about maybe some different headlines
is there
based on
something
whether it's going to be yes or no, but we won't know until.
I can.
It's a little bit like, you know, in light of that before the election and they have headlines for this party winning and headlines for this party winning. Yes, I have to think about
Yep.
how that might go.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, it is also possible. So we have, I think some people.
Only about 10 minutes. A little bit. 10 minutes. And you're welcome to talk amongst yourselves as well if you wanted to compare notes with your press gallery colleagues. What you think might happen or how you might best represent it. Yeah. You can close it with the grants. No, it's private enterprise.
Planting lots of trees.
Oh, yes, we could,
So we're not very
Everybody's proposing.
We don't make any money out of that from
So federal government department responsible for design solution.
I can imagine you could be for this.
Launch day for Harvard.
I'm assuming that we're going to see.
Yeah, I'm a rural news media, the Australian community. So I actually
Which will be.
Rural community agreement.
I think so. I can have that. Am I also writing for the plans?
I guess it's safe to assume that you're writing. You might be writing to AI as well.
Stu first, there's a social.
Do you know if this is on private land as well? Like, is this like a mandated 20% reduction only on public?
It's the council of the
Oh,
living
yeah.
river. So if you think about riparian
Okay.
zones for a river, which would tend to be
Sure,
beneficial.
okay.
So if we think about, let's assume that we.
Yes, okay, all right, we'll try that.
Landholders,
There we go.
you know, have to leave buffer zones and so on, but yeah, people quite often leave privately held land, not necessarily unregulated.
How did you feel about cutting down on your requirement to?
Well, it might look for space for you to grow. Yeah, that's right, it might be like going back to the classic farmer and kind of let's cut down as many trees as possible, so we've got more problem space.
Okay, yeah, okay, we're going to, sure, yeah, that's fine, we're gonna put the, we'll put that, in this one.
Yeah, and it could be that they come back to some kind of conditionality, it might be that, yes, provided this, 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 this.
I am the International Irrigators Alliance, which is a lobby group representing the interests of foreign agricultural enterprises. So I think I'm quite a supporter of this proposal, more space for the smaller plants, which is what we're growing. Yes.
That seems to be working. Sure. Okay, no worries, I'll just,
It's very shame that some of the major streets are
see.
spring.
Yes, that's good.
Okay, great.
So,
Right.
solution was. Chopped in. Salvaging
Just going to try and get the
Speaking teachers. The tree should yes.
So I'm just going to share that with the other computer. We've got the other Zoom session. So I'm just going to start.
Exactly like the Cowboys. The Cowboys. It's the Cowboys.
Yeah, it's just
Irrigators Alliance.
Sorry,
Agricultural. We'd like to see the trees down. Space for our crops to grow.
We do kind of know how they would feel about it.
Well, I'm saying, I just think
Yes.
they're not particularly attractive.
It's all been woke.
Yeah. Thanks for doing that, Stephanie. We don't have the only Zoom licenses we have were from the assistant governance project.
Need me to do anything.
At this stage, but I'm going to get that.
You can probably turn the camera around at least. One would be jammed. Oh, okay. Yeah, oh, right, okay. Someone using their service high manner of use. We are just going to get the other room in, I think. It's been stretching the capabilities of the technology and the Zoom system. Yeah, putting it to the test. Hey.
Can't apply more the trees and make them.
That's like, can we join with computer audio? Yeah.
No, you and I need to team up.
Well, you,
I'm Elder Alliance, a social advocates for stations.
already have excited me.
I'm just going to buy some. Oh, okay. Can we hear the discussion? Speaking to do.
Still just getting organized. So that we might need to,
I think I have created Farmers pays full spelling.
Oh, you good?
No, that was AI, okay.
What's that one again?
Farmers face full spelling.
Fantastic.
20% of the trees, including I amended it a little bit.
Yeah.
The other one was roots, if it indicates it doesn't. Roots of resistance. And then I might change it depending on, we can work out whether it's crucial to both. Modified mushrooms crucial in defeating basic free hole.
Amazing.
Yeah. Oh, that's they're little, like who they're representing. Say the large terrestrial plants.
Come on, Sky.
Kenneth is some other sort of terrestrial plant.
That's very
Who are we? Australian Unite Conservative News.
Yeah,
I want the trees to go down, so good for my agricultural interests.
I'm glad you gave the green we want everyone to be able to hear.
Oh,
That's possible. Yeah.
To the way that they talk about.
So we're just trying to get the sound so that we can hear their deliberations.
Oh.
I don't even know what deliberations.
Ships. We're kind of using that like leverage points framework and to think about join where everybody joins this.
Well, Jonathan's got audio in this.
Yeah, so we're not.
So he can hear.
I think so.
Yeah.
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 Yes. But if they're starting to discuss, then yeah, it'd be good if we could hear them.
When does the process begin is the question that you always have with these kind of things. Like people are like, no, we're not ready for the process yet. And like they're doing the process while they're trying to get ready. Yeah. Yeah.
It's time, it's negotiation.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jonathan. And I know stories.
And yep. But we're still kind of
Can't really see anything if we open the mammoth background. Where can we scroll to another page for the mammals, for instance?
So each individual file is the one that, so you just need to select one. I think, so mammals and birds has been taken, but if you want to grab one of the other ones, or you can just change your name, it doesn't really matter which one you choose. It's just, yeah, to add another one to the discussion. So if you want to choose one, you can either change your name, as Alison, I think it was, did. I've forgotten your name. Or you can put the background up.
Okay, perfect. We'll do that. Thank you.
Right. All right, Jonathan, I'm not sure if we're up.
Yes, we are. Now, can you?
Right, I think that's better now. Thank you everyone for sticking with us through that little bit of technical hula hooping there. But we have a small group of committed council members here, so we're going to leap into our role play. So the people in the room, you will have seen the agenda item, the agenda that we're working on. So we will assume our roles now. I will be your chair. We have with us today the member for large terrestrial plants, the member for small terrestrial plants, the member for mammals and birds, and the member for humans, who are very welcome to turn their cameras on if they feel comfortable to do so. So we are going to, you've joined us today partway through our meeting. We're in the 13th meeting of the Council of the Living River. So you're joining us today at standing business item 1.1. So to begin with today, I'm going to invite the member for small terrestrial plants to take the microphone and introduce their request. So they are going to introduce the item 1.1 that has been tabled. Following this, I will provide the most affected member, which is the large terrestrial plants, a right of reply before offering the microphone to any other members that would like to speak to this request. So the member for small terrestrial plants, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Councillor. So we have a very reasonable request here that the powerhouse connection between the soil, sky, the water, other small terrestrial plants, and that our colleagues at large plants from the aquatic realm have, through no fault of their own, been over-allocated. And in doing so, that affects small plants that are the small things that run the world. And our allocation is an allocation to the health of the earth, to the health of the sky, and to the health of all those smaller creatures that shuttle between the large terrestrial plants, the aquatic waves, and deep into the soil. So we are the engine of biodiversity, the engine of exchange, and we would humbly request that the over-allocation be recompensed to the small terrestrial plants and our colleagues, the large terrestrial plants.
Thank you very much to the member for the small terrestrial plants. So to be clear, the item reads the members, which is the small terrestrial plants, aquatic and estuarine plants, and fish and other aquatic species, have requested that because of this greater than normal inflow, which has been noticed and monitored by the member for AI, and unplanned regeneration of large terrestrial plants, that the growth in numbers of large terrestrial plants and the use of inflow that is negatively affecting the species the members represent. They're requesting a 20% reduction in the number of large terrestrial plants to reduce their impact on other species. So large terrestrial plants, there has been a request to reduce your number by 20%. I give you the floor now to respond to this request.
Thank you. Thank you, Council. The large terrestrial plants are horrified that this would be a motion put before the council. The idea that trees that have stood for sometimes 800 to 1200 years would be cut down because of an additional amount of water following these heavy drought years is absolutely shocking. And I think this represents a massive misunderstanding of the role of these large trees in a balanced and healthy ecosystem. We have seen over many years the proliferation of smaller terrestrial plants, in particular introduced species, invasive species, weeds, thick understory, which is not only changing the soil chemistry and making it very difficult for us to survive, hence our greater reliance on water. But this is also leading to a massive increase in fire risk. These small plants are the very ones that are increasing the risk both to us as large terrestrial plants and to the humans and to the fish and to all the other mammals and reptiles that live in this environment. And I think another grossly misunderstood point and unrecognised point in this motion is the massive role that we play in storing carbon. What do you think is going to happen when you chop 20% of us down? What's going to happen to that carbon? It's not going to help. So we strongly reject this motion.
Thank you, large terrestrial plants. I would now like to open the floor to our other members present, the member for humans and or the member for mammals and birds. Would either of you like to speak to this item? Do you have an opinion on this request?
So maybe the humans can quickly say that they don't fully understand what is meant with the inflow. So if I would like to formulate an opinion, really sorry about that.
That's all right. As I understand, the small terrestrial plants and their member friends, the aquatic plants and so on, feel that too much water is being taken up by the large trees. So they feel we need to remove the large trees so that more water can go to other parts of the ecosystem.
Okay. So maybe the humans might take the time to listen to the mammals and birds and form their opinion about this, if that is okay.
Yes, of course, mammals and birds. Would you like to, do you have anything to say on this matter?
Okay, so mammals and birds would like to say that we do have more shelter since the advent of more habitat through the large vegetation has grown, that we've got more choices of places to go, we've got more nesting and, you know, kind of breeding places and more protection from predators. And also that our variety has increased because the range of habitats that we've got access to has actually improved. So we're a little bit hesitant, even though, you know, some species, some of us are actually more comfortable in the more open areas. You know, we feel that we've actually got both or more choice of habitat, and in fact that our habitat has increased. We're not at the moment particularly worried about the amount of water because we still have access to water. So, you know, we're just probably not really supporting the removal of the 20% of the large terrestrial plants.
Thank you to the member of mammals and birds. I will note that I've had a message from the absent reptiles, insects, arachnids, microbiota and fungi, who have said that the cutting down of 20% of the trees would enable excellent habitat for their members, and they feel that more rotting logs would be an excellent proposition. So they have indicated they are in favour of this action. I wonder whether the humans have come to form an opinion that they would like to share.
Well, we definitely see both points, and we would like to come to maybe a place where there is not a compromise, but everyone can be happy. So we see definitely the point of the CO2 and the emissions being taken by the large plants. And also, as humans, we love to be in nature and look at these big plants and surround ourselves with that. So we see maybe that 20% is too much. We would like to maybe propose a compromise, being for 10%. Do you have anything to add?
No, I agree with my fellow humans.
Very
Interested in planting some more trees to build some more infrastructure, whatever. But yeah, maybe we can get to a compromise that is most efficient for all parties involved.
Very good. Well, oh, sorry.
Yes, mammals and birds just thought of another point, which is that when the trees are young and the forest hasn't matured, they actually use quite a lot of water. But once the trees have matured, they don't use nearly as much water, but they do actually attract water. So that in the longer term, they will probably increase the water flow to this particular area.
Wonderful. Well, thank you to the members. We will need to come to a resolution on this. May I suggest, based on the discussion, that we could, with your permission, small terrestrial plants, reduce the recommended amount to 10% and select only new growth trees and no old growth trees. Could I ask the members to vote whether they would be happy to accept this amended resolution?
Hang on. How come only the large terrestrial plants are having to make a sacrifice? I think the humans should reduce the amount of water they take out of the system.
I will take that on notice, member, for large terrestrial trees, and we will add that to the meeting agenda for next meeting to discuss the use. I will have to say that we must proceed with this voting for this item. So would the members present like to vote if they approve for a 10% reduction and of new trees only? Yes, humans are voting for that.
We'll be calling
mammals and birds.
in a minute. Press gallery.
All right.
Undecided.
All right.
Terrestrial plants are against any motion to cull us.
Very good. Well, we will have to hold over this motion until next meeting, having been unable to reach a consensus. Thank you very much for your attendance at our meeting. As I understand it, we will reconvene back in the other room to hear how this has gone. So thank you very much for your time, everyone. Yeah, go back to the other two. Yeah, thanks.
So they're going to join us back on this one. All right, so you've got a minute or two to finalise your headline, given that unexpected outcome of no resolution. 1.1.
I didn't think of that.
Back to the audience.
Yeah, back to.
Recording in progress.
I mean, it was a
Your audience?
Yeah, I don't know.
Right. Right. So Sky, can you hear us okay again?
Motion.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. Great. And that's it.
Successfully foiled.
We may well be waiting for
Brainstorming.
more meeting to come back. Rejoin. Summer come. So I guess, Lorraine, whenever you're ready.
So do we have any headlines ready and available?
Yeah. You want me to just read it out?
Yeah.
Okay, so the headline, do you want me to tell you who I'm representing?
Yes, please.
I'm representing Elder Ally, the social movement organisation pushing for First Nations voices in decision making. My headline is First Nations voices absent in decision to cut down 400-year-old trees. And then my subheading or first quote is unconnected and siloed representation misses the view of the whole group, says Elder Allies, a social movement pushing for First Nations.
Beautiful. All right. Who would like to? Who else has a headline ready? Ready?
Okay, I'm the federal government department responsible for council relations. And the headline is Striking the Right Balance. Federal government leads visionary scenario for just and safe futures in an election year.
Anyone else? Yeah, I'm the International Irrigators Alliance, a lobby group representing the interests of foreign-owned agricultural enterprises. Trees hold our food security to ransom.
Jasper?
Yeah, so I've got Australians Unite, which is a conservative news media website. And my headline is Drain the Swamp. Squabbling creatures serve up stagnant water.
I'll go next. Mine's a little clumsier, but I'm the Progressive Media News Organization. Mine is no resolution on the future of the living river, but a win for deliberative democracy.
Anyone else?
I had the South Australian government, and to be honest, I'm not sure of the but I guess I had Council of Living River deliberations leaves cloud of uncertainty over large-scale restoration programs and interstate downstream water flows.
I have the Australian Community Media, so it's a rural news media. I said expanding participation equals more government in action. New rural community citizens of personified plants and animals leads to stalling a proposed tree cull.
Feel free to write it. Okay.
Okay, so I'm representing the Carbon Cowboys, a private enterprise running carbon credit projects through mass regeneration. And I had, selfish proposal by small plants narrowly foiled.
Anyone else we haven't heard from? John, go on.
Well, I'm still trying to figure out what my organisation does. It's Food First, a social and corporate coalition agitating for Australian grown produce and local food security. I can't decide if it's big corporate or small organic farmers. Or
Make it up. Whichever you feel most
well,
comfortable
so the
with.
first one. Council ignores our small crop plants in relevant debate.
Anybody else? All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Press Gallery. Thank you to all of the participants online. That was a very interesting debate. And as we said, this is just a taster of the process. So this kind of thing, you would normally run it over at least half a day, and preferably perhaps a full day, to really try to immerse yourself in the roles and understand the process fully, work through an agenda in a more rigorous way than we've been able to do this afternoon. We are very short on time. We've got 4 minutes left, so we won't go through the formal reflection process, but I did want to open the floor to observations and also online, perhaps if you could drop in the chat, share them here. Observations, thoughts, reflections on this kind of activity to foster that kind of speculative, imaginary, creative engagement with possible plausible futures. Do you think that there were strengths in it? What resonated, or what is challenging when we're trying to extend ourselves into this imaginary space? Any thoughts? Anyone who can participate online, you can either put it in the chat or unmute and just have a quick minute to say how you felt it went. Apart from the logistical aspects of trying to work out hybrid format.
I just thought I'd say that it's such a nice way to really bring to life all of the complex nuances involved in coming to a decision and to get away from the polarized, like, referendum, are you for or against an issue, and take a more deliberative approach.
Okay. Thank you. Other thoughts?
I really like the bring to life wording there, because I've often thought, oh, wouldn't it be great if we had representation for non-humans in some way? That would just be a good thing, and this shows actually to be really hard. How would you make those decisions, and who would represent the different voices? So it makes it much more tangible and gets you thinking through the implications.
I think good on you for trying something new and giving us a different format to explore. I think that was fun and a good choice.
Yeah, thanks to Stephanie.
I thought it was really creative to bring in both a whole new legal system to grapple with, but also it highlighted to me some of the responses, how people need an understanding of web ecology, for example, or you can see sort of how factually or misinformation can push when you've got to represent all these diverse voices.
Alison has mentioned it's a good way to examine multiple perspectives, including non-humans. Yeah.
I also really appreciated it, but I also think it brings up the issue of representation. So I, for instance, had a coalition of First Nations, and I felt really uncomfortable presuming I know what they would want. So I mean, with First Nations, of course, we could bring in representatives, but then same, of course, is true for the non-humans. So how you really involve them without projecting our anthropocentric perspectives into what they would say. So this is quite challenging.
Yeah, and you can see that everything was kind of filtered through that almost a utilitarian kind of viewpoint, isn't it? You sort of end up having to grapple with it in that way, which is hard to get out of. How do you do it? So it's really tough to just
Yeah, so I've done something similar to this in the past, and what it brings up all these stereotypes in people's performances. And that's fun, and I think people enjoy playing out stereotypes. But I also have a question about how do you go beyond stereotypes and break down assumptions about who other people are and how they're thinking to actually progress into a more open, generous way of relating to other people. Yeah.
Could I just briefly pick up on that point? Maybe this is connected to something we actually do in our introduction to international relations unit, and Ashton has been involved in this sort of UN negotiation simulations. And before the simulation happens, we have students have to put together a negotiation brief and so on, and they're encouraged. Well, they can sort of toe the party line if they want to, but they're also encouraged to maybe take a sort of Frank Vilas or their own spin on maybe what might North Korea how might it be able to approach negotiations differently, and I suppose maybe you could, with enough time, I think you could do that sort of thing as well. That time to sort of research. And yeah, and maybe come up with a different position can sometimes help to challenge the stereotype. But I think what we did today is great.
If I could jump in on that too, I think with the idea of the stereotypes and so on, it is very easy to fall into that. And there's two things that I would say to that. One is that moving into the future, using it as speculative future as opposed to doing it in the present. So you're using fictionalized people or fictionalized scenarios, I think is important and helpful, rather than actually trying to speak for someone in the present context. But also, I think what comes out of it, like the purpose in my mind of doing these sorts of activities isn't to accurately represent what these people or these groups or these non-living beings think. That's not the purpose of it. The purpose is, I think, a bit as Wendy touched on, was to think about these different perspectives and start to grapple with some of those complexities. So it's more about the questions it raises and the reflections that you have afterwards than the content that comes out of it. So it's not like this sort of, wasn't being proposed as some utopian future of how we should do things. It's a disrupted sort of idea. It's a different future that gets us to start to ask some pretty important questions that we might not ask otherwise.
And I would like to add something to that, because I think that's a very important point that Stephanie is mentioning, and it's about how these speculative futures, how can we use speculative futures in our practice in a way that, and it's about how enabling this reflexivity about what we are doing and being more consequential as them. So that's the purpose of it. It's not that describing utopias or dystopias, but it's for us putting ourselves on that and being more careful about those how we engage in that. So there's more questions. We wanted to discuss more questions with you today, but we don't have more time. But it's how we can enable those spaces for having those conversations. So
just in the spirit of extending that, it makes me think that if it's speculative, we should be sort of pushing the boundaries a bit of the process as well. So, whilst we brought in novel actors, actually we still stay within the same boundaries of our kind of, very well rehearsed democratic processes, and yet there's the process there that we can play with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was very much crafted to be familiar in that bureaucratic sense and decision-making process sense. But
we could have disrupted that, but we didn't. Yeah.
So we are going to run short of time. So Katrina, as a panelist, I'll throw to you. And then
I was just going to say, in support of what Stephanie was saying, with the games that we run, have the same process in that it's not the game itself that's what you do, like to stimulate the discussion. It's the debrief afterwards. So you have to have time to run the game, but also give yourself like a good 30 to 60 minutes afterwards to talk, to debrief.
Yeah, absolutely. Sky, do you have any closing comments as one of our panelists and connoisseur of the headlines that were proposed? You're on mute.
I thought it was thoroughly. Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, great, very good headlines. And I thoroughly enjoyed the role play. I think that's a really novel way of having to, represent and consider a position and a perspective. So, yeah, I loved being a tree.
All right. Well, I think that might be Katrina, did we get to you? Yeah, okay. I think that might be a nice note to finish on. Thank you everybody for participating. Thank you everyone online for participating and contributing as well. We know that this kind of thing isn't, and Bob's made the comment, role play and unfamiliar roles and a bit of humour can take a participant out of their day role, which helps imagination. It's not something we tend to do every day, so I appreciate that everyone embraced it and went with it, both online and in the room. So thank you everyone. I hope that has successfully given you a bit of a taster of the kinds of things that we can start. I think there's a lot more unpacking that you would normally do in this sort of process to engage that imagination and think about the future.
Great.
Thanks everyone. Thank you.
so much, Aaron, and thanks so much, Claudia, for putting this
And I should just,
together.
just in closing, sorry, Jonathan, be absolutely clear that the role play is Stephanie's product, and this is something she's been developing over a number of iterations and will be deploying in her PhD research as well. So yeah, great work, Stephanie, for leading us through all of that.
Thank you. Thanks for giving it a go.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. Thanks, Guy. We will wrap up our session now, and we'll have our next final session for the Australia Research Centre Day starting at 5:30. Again, for the online participants, if you wanted to join us, just join via the separate link on the ESG forum website. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.